Welcome to Norse Code, the #1 podcast for your Minnesota Vikings. I'm your host and producer. My name is James Pagoshnik. Thank you guys so much for listening. And at the other end of the tin cannon string, we have our analyst and co-host. You know him from numerous blogs and podcasts around the internet, most notably from Pro Football Network. He is Mr. Useful Human, Arif Hassan. Arif, how lucky is Aaron Rodgers that he is not the most prominent conspiracy theorist on the internet this week?
Yeah, I mean, he, relatively speaking, is skating by, although I imagine, I don't know when Packers quarterback availability is. If it already happened and they missed it and we didn't get a follow-up on that, I guess that sucks. But if it's on Friday, then we'll probably get some questions and maybe that'll revive everything. But I'm guessing not. If I haven't seen it on my timeline, it probably didn't happen.
That tends to be your principle on most things, actually.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Well, what I'm saying is, if someone doesn't throw left in a game, people will tell me immediately, right? That's what I mean, right? It's not.
Yeah, well, absolutely. It's your brand.
Yeah, exactly. And so now that I've had, I think the last I checked, 700,000 people watched that video I tweeted out of DeShone Kizer telling us that Aaron Rodgers not only introduced him to 9/11 trutherism, but a number of other conspiracies, including hollow earth, lizard people, and moon landing conspiracies.
Not just introduced, but they bonded over them.
Well, they bonded over them. They learned critical thinking. And also, DeShone Kizer does not think these conspiracies are jokes. And that it seems like he actually believes them. And was not laughing with the rest of the podcast hosts when these were brought up. So, that's interesting and cool and kind of actually on brand for Aaron Rodgers, but in an alarming way. But nobody cares about that anymore because one of the greatest hip-hop minds of our generation turns out not to be that great of a mind.
Unmade graduation. That's the best thing that's been said about it so far.
There you go.
Yeah. Well, welcome to this episode of Norse Code. Hope you guys are all doing well. We'll be going to a preview of the Jets game with Scott Mason from the Play Like a Jet podcast. I'll go to an interview that Arif conducted earlier today, and then we'll go into the mailbag as well. But before we start, just again, thank you guys so much for listening to Norse Code. Really do appreciate it. If you enjoy the show and would like to donate to the show, you can do so in a couple of different ways. You can go over to patreon.com/Norse Code and get access to the Discord, get access to all the bonus episodes, and get access to much more. A special thank you to the account and the Funky Bunch for joining us over on Patreon. Thank you so much. And you can also go to paypal.me/Norse Code as well. You can also go to norsecode.threadless.com and check us out there and get a baby onesie. This week, a couple of mugs were sold. I believe a throw pillow. I don't think I've seen another shower curtain yet, but there's time.
There's time. Remember, 'tis the season. I would have changed my Twitter handle to reflect that it is the holiday season here in the West. We would call that Christmas, probably regardless of denomination at this point. But I can't. I just hate turkey forever now. Thank you for your excellent stewardship of the platform, Elon Musk.
That is it's
I mean, what I mean is to buy the merch for your loved ones, I guess, or yourself. I don't care.
Buy it for your dog. We don't care.
Yeah.
Normally I'm against pets wearing clothes, but I can make an exception if it's a fine wreath outfit. A little kid's shirt, whatever. Be fine. I was kind of laughing at that though, because there's merchandise out there of the wreath that has both of us signing it. Like that's a cursed item. And apparently Luke Braun is the signature he's waiting to get for the top one. So
really not Dusty.
No, he said at the live show it was going to be Luke for the other head.
That's going to ruin the whole thing.
Probably, but we're not talking about that. So if you really want signed merch, we'll figure something out. Like I think Nate Tice was asking for a signed one too.
Both Nate Tice and NFL Network's Patrick Claybon want signed or wreaths. So we'll probably figure out something for that.
I feel like we can possibly make something work. So but norsecode.threadless.com. Again, thank you guys so much for listening. Let's get into the show and get into the interview that Arif conducted earlier today with Scott Mason from the Play Like a Jet podcast.
All right, I'm here with Scott Mason of the daily Play Like a Jet podcast, and you can find it at playlikeajet.com. How you doing, man?
Hey, Arif. Pleasure to be on with you, man. You know I'm a big fan of your work. I was glad you were able to come on Play Like a Jet, so really glad to be able to join you and talk about the Jets because you came on and helped me paint a picture for my audience about the Vikings, so this will be fun.
Yeah, of course. So the Jets, like the Vikings, are in this spot where they've got a winning record, but people probably fairly don't believe in the true quality of these teams reflecting what their record is. And this is probably not a prove-it game for either team, but it can go some distance into kind of demonstrating their quality. Before we head into the specifics about the various parts of the roster, what is your thought on that line of argumentation, that understanding of these teams?
That it being a prove-it game, I think for the Jets, this really is an extremely important game because they've got a very difficult schedule down the stretch here. They're on the road 4 of their last 6 games, and all 4 of those road games are against teams with winning records. They've got to play the Vikings in this matchup. Then they go to Buffalo to take on the Bills. And then the last 2 games of the season, they've got road games against Seattle and the Dolphins. So it's very important that they get this win because if they don't, they put themselves in a very difficult spot. Remember, even though the Patriots lost to the Bills, and so they're now a couple games behind the Jets, if the Patriots come anywhere close, they've got the tiebreaker because they beat the Jets twice. You've also got the Chargers that are right behind the Jets as well. So they've got to realistically win 3 of the last 6 to probably be comfortable. That would get them to 10 wins. And they could very easily not do that. Remember, like I said, 4 games on the road against teams with winning records. So I think we could talk about whether it's a prove-it game or not, but it's crucial that the Jets get this win, and if they don't, they put themselves in a really tough spot.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting, kind of a different spot than where the Vikings are. I mean, the Vikings have so many games ahead of their divisional rivals that, should the Vikings, win this game and then, Detroit loses, the Vikings mathematically clinch the division. It's, in week 13, right? So obviously the Vikings have a lot to play for. They want to maintain that 2nd seed, but there is some distance between the 2nd and 3rd seed, and now some distance between the 1st and 2nd seed. So not as if the rest of the season is going to be kind of, on autopilot or anything like that, but definitely different spots in terms of how tight the race is. Let's talk about kind of some of the changes the Jets have made in order to make sure that run is something that they can make good on. I think the primary one everyone's going to be talking about, and again, something that I think makes sense as a talker, is the decision to proactively bench Zach Wilson, not injury-related reasons, but to actually bench Zach Wilson for Mike White. Before we talk about Mike White's style of play, his level of play, and his quality, why him and not Joe Flacco?
Well, it's interesting, Arif. A couple of weeks ago, Robert Saleh voluntarily said that without really being prodded, Mike White had been promoted to the backup, and then he was pressed on that a little bit. And he basically said that the reason they did it is because they wanted Mike White to get the opportunity if something were to arise. And everybody at the time assumed that meant that he was talking about injury, that if Zach Wilson got hurt, they wanted Mike White to be able to play in case of injury. We'll never know for sure whether Saleh had this in the back of his mind or not, or whether he just felt that Mike White had surpassed Joe Flacco on the depth chart. But I think what really happened was, from everything that we pieced together here, White was just better than Flacco at practice. He seems to have a real grasp of that offense. And also, I think with Flacco, the problem is he's just a statue at this point. He can't move. Now, Mike White isn't as athletic or mobile as Zach Wilson, but if you watched last week, the game that the Jets played against the Chicago Bears, and if you've seen Mike White in the other games that he's played, he can move. He's not Justin Fields. He's, as I said, he's not Zach Wilson. He's not Josh Allen, nobody like that. But he can move smoothly in the pocket. He can get out of the pocket when he needs to and make some throws when he's on the move. So I think they felt like he was a better fit for this offense. I think they felt like at this point he gave them a better chance to win than Joe Flacco does. Flacco played admirably the couple of games that he was in, and we know he had those heroics at the end with Garrett Wilson in the Cleveland Browns game where they pulled out that insane win. But ultimately, he is what he is at this point, a 37-year-old, barely mobile quarterback. And I think they just felt that White, if they needed him, would be a better option than Joe Flacco. And now they've gotten to the point where they decided they needed to pull Wilson, and so it was White and not Flacco.
So why exactly? I mean, I know Zach Wilson's been playing poorly. I'm not asking this out of ignorance or anything like that, but there's a broader question here about how you treat young quarterbacks, not like, fairly, unfairly, but rather in terms of their development curve. What can be done to, make good on not just a first round investment, but a fairly high first round pick. And, whether or not there's a future for Zach Wilson. Why did they bench Zach Wilson in the context of having a development plan in mind, and how you balance that against, being in the middle of a winning season, but needing to win more?
I think ultimately what did it was the comments that he made in the post-game press conference after his horrendous performance against the Patriots. And ultimately, Zach Wilson really cost the Jets both Patriots games. I'm convinced, and I think if you go back and watch the game, you'll be convinced of this, if you didn't see it the first time, that if the Jets had gotten even top 25 quarterback play in those two games, and maybe even less than that, maybe top 30 quarterback play, honestly, especially in that second game against the Patriots, they may be 9-2 right now instead of 7-4. And I think what happened in that Patriots game was Zach Wilson was unbearably bad, but afterwards in the post-game press conference, he made some comments that just, by all accounts, the defensive players had enough, and I think a lot of the offensive players had too. You saw what happened with Elijah Moore. And for your audience, if you're not familiar, because you may not be following the Jets super closely, Elijah Moore was a second-round pick of the Jets last year out of Ole Miss. He was really, really good once he got cooking down the stretch of the season, got hurt at the end, but everybody expected him to be a number one caliber wide receiver this year, and then he just really fell through the cracks, especially after Zach Wilson came back. Barely even targeted. And so he got really upset, threw a bit of a tantrum, asked for a trade. They ended up benching him for a bit, sent him home for a week, and essentially people had almost counted him out because they were thinking about what a foul attitude he had and all that. But it was less about the team and more about, I think he just didn't believe in Zach Wilson anymore. Wilson wasn't even looking at him or getting him the ball. And so when you have a quarterback who is not only playing poorly, but not even remotely giving you a chance to win. I mean, it was 3-3 with 2 minutes left in that game against the Patriots. All Zach Wilson would have had to do is drive them down and get a field goal, and they would have snuck out of New England with a victory, and it was a 3-and-out. It was pathetic. And what I think happened was when you combine all those things and the fact that Wilson, after the game, said, when asked, do you think that you let your defense down when they surrendered only 3 points on the road to the Patriots? Do you think that you bear responsibility for this loss? He said no. And then he also was asked about his performance, and he said his receivers sometimes run routes that he doesn't like, and he pointed fingers. And I think when they sat down and looked at the tape and saw how bad he was, and then combine that with the fact that the defensive players were enraged and a lot of the offensive players, including Elijah Moore, had enough, they just felt like they were going to lose the locker room. And this is a team that, as you said, Arif, has to balance the possibility of going to the playoffs for the first time in 12 years, and they can't just look away from that. And so you had a situation where Wilson was maybe the worst quarterback in the league so far this year. The locker room has completely turned against him. If they wanted to salvage this season, they had to make this move. So I think they've done their best to portray this as, they've said it's a reset where Zach Wilson, they're going to rework his fundamentals. They're going to try and rebuild them from the ground up. And it's possible that at some point he comes back, but I think what this boils down to is it's now Mike White's team until he loses the job. So if he plays well for the next couple of games, they can't turn away from him because they're in the middle of a playoff chase, and it would destroy the locker room to do something like that. But maybe if Wilson works hard, keeps his head up, does all the right things, says all the right things, and White falters, he gets another chance. Or maybe next year there's some sort of competition. But I think for the long run, they had to do this for his own personal growth because he was just getting worse. And for the team's benefit, they had to do this because he was just putting them in a position where there was no way that they could win with the way he was playing, especially now without Breece Hall there to just hand the ball and lean on when the running game isn't as powerful as it was before. And now you have to try and generate offense from the quarterback, and he's playing as poorly as he is playing, and you have a defense so good, you can't, it's no good.
So, I mean, it sounds like there's multiple things that Zach Wilson needs to work on. I mean, that's true of any quarterback, but I think catastrophically, Wilson has a leadership deficit. It certainly seems like, I mean, he's a young player. I understand it. But again, first round pick quarterback, you kind of expect even for those young guys to kind of pick up on the importance of leadership. He clearly has, if they're talking about mechanical issues, it sounds like there are accuracy issues there as well. He does not strike me as somebody who reads defenses along with the world's best quarterbacks. And so how likely is it that you can develop these multiple tracks after, you have kind of this sort of confidence shake? And also, just generally speaking, is leadership a muscle that you can develop while in an NFL locker room? Certainly outside of NFL contexts, people grow as leaders all the time. But inside, the tight pressure cooker of the NFL and the short timelines and stuff like that, is that something he can develop along with, accuracy, anticipation, the ability to read defenses, processing speed, those kinds of things?
It's tough because you look at the track record of quarterbacks that have played as poorly as he has early on, and you'd be hard-pressed to find somebody that was able to recover from that. I will say that from the leadership standpoint, if you look at a guy like Geno Smith, 9 years it took him to really find his footing. He's finally playing well in Seattle now. We'll see if this ends up being a fluke, but maybe sometimes it just takes failure to mature. Maybe it takes perspective. I will say that, like you said, these are young guys. And one thing that struck me from checking out Ryan Leaf's memoir, which I highly recommend if you're a football fan, he talked about how he was a 21-year-old kid who grew up on a ranch in like North Dakota or something like that, or Wyoming, somewhere in one of those smaller states. And he said he was then picked second in the draft, given all this money, and basically told to be the face of the franchise and be the on-field CEO of $1 billion entity. And he said, I love my parents very much. They're the best people I know. They're the best parents I ever could have had. But they're farmers. What could they have ever taught me about how to do this? I was a 21-year-old kid. I wasn't mature enough to handle it. And you think about it, and a lot of these kids, there's a reason why so many of them fail, because that's just so much for any of them to take on. So it's not impossible. And when you talk to the people he played with at BYU, you heard a lot of positive things about his leadership and his ability to prepare and all that. And hopefully the perspective of being benched and taken away from all of this, at least temporarily, helps. But as I said, Arif, you're a student of the game as well. You go back and look at the list of guys that played as poorly as Zach Wilson has played the first 20 games of their career and see how many of them have succeeded, and it's going to be a very, very short list.
All right. So, I mean, that does lead us to the conversation about, Mike White. I mean, this is not just a Zach Wilson preview. He's not even going to be playing. So what will the Vikings see when they play Mike White? What kind of quarterback is there to either be exploited or there to make life difficult for the Vikings?
So the interesting thing about Mike White is if you go back, and I checked this because I thought it was something worth looking at. You look at his scouting report before the 2018 draft. because I don't think most of us watched him play at Western Kentucky unless we were really digging in on the draft. And if you were a Jets fan at that point, you were looking at Sam Darnold, Baker Mayfield, Josh Allen, Josh Rosen, right? The scouting report on Mike White was that he's this big kid with a big arm. He can throw deep. He can throw with touch deep and all that. But that a lot of his weaknesses were processing, getting the ball out quickly, dealing with pressure, all of that, right? But if you watch him so far with the Jets, and granted it's a small sample size, he's only played in 5 games, he's actually been really good at a lot of the things that his scouting report in college said were areas he needed to improve on, which maybe means that in the 5 years that he's been in the league, he's been able to develop himself and break himself of these bad habits and really improve. What we haven't seen are a lot of the things that I talked about as far as strengths. We haven't seen him really throw the deep ball. We haven't seen him try to throw with touch down the field. And so what we noticed from the first few games with Mike White was that if a team was able to take away the short game, which is what the Buffalo Bills did, he struggled. That was where he really excelled. And he threw 4 interceptions. Now, the thing with Mike White is he throws with confidence. He plays with a lot of confidence. So he's willing to throw passes into very tight windows, and that has the potential to burn you. As you know, Arif, you watched Brett Favre when he was on the Vikings, and you watched him for many years when he was playing against the Vikings with the Packers. When you have an incredible arm like Brett Favre, you're going to throw a lot of interceptions doing what he did, but you're going to make a lot of great plays because you're so physically gifted. Now, Mike White isn't in that Brett Favre category, but in his mind, he has that level of confidence. So he's going to make some throws that are going to give the defense an opportunity to intercept the pass. In fact, just to give you one example, against the Bears, Eddie Jackson was this close to picking off a pass that Mike White threw, went right through his hands, and ironically enough, went into the hands of Garrett Wilson, who took it 54 yards for a touchdown. So he's going to give you that opportunity, and there are going to be chances for anybody who's a solid player in the secondary to maybe make a play like that into an interception or some form of turnover. So that's one thing to watch out for with the Vikings that they might be able to capitalize on. What I would assume is they're going to try and force him to throw deep and to go away from the short game. The Bears did that a little bit, and he was able to still succeed, but the Bears have a really bad defense. They have arguably the worst defense in the league. The Vikings don't have a great pass defense. You know this better than I do, Arif. I would say, just based on most metrics, it's probably slightly below average. But if they can force him into a situation where he has to throw deep, that might be something that could really work to their benefit, because going into the game on Sunday against the Bears, 40% of his completion so far in his career had gone to running backs. So that kind of tells you what his strengths and weaknesses are to this point.
That's pretty interesting. That running back tidbit, I think, characterizes the game a little bit, and I think it kind of leads us into this conversation about the Jets running backs. I don't know if Michael Carter will be healthy. Sounds like he's day-to-day, so he could be healthy, but that seems almost immaterial. It sounds like he's the 3rd running back. James Robinson is the 4th running back. You've got Bam Knight, an undrafted rookie, and Ty Johnson, who they claimed off of waivers from Detroit, if I remember. What is this running back room? I know that not having Breece Hall hurts the explosiveness, but it certainly seems like there is a level of production that can be expected here.
It's kind of strange, Reef, because obviously the thunder and lightning combination of Hall and Carter was what everybody was looking forward to. And then finally Breece Hall got cooking, and he looked like he could be a special player, the type of player that could really put the offense on his shoulders. And that's what he was doing until he got hurt. And so after that, they went and traded for James Robinson. Now, they already had Michael Carter, as I said, and they had Ty Johnson, who was playing sparingly. They had Bam Knight on the practice squad. He was an undrafted free agent out of NC State. And if you watch him at NC State, he was pretty explosive. The fact that he had a lot of rushing yards was certainly helped by the fact that he was behind Ike Ekwonu, running behind him a lot. That's never going to hurt you, especially at the collegiate level. But he also was an explosive kick returner, too. He made the team in training camp and then ended up getting demoted to the practice squad. And so when James Robinson was traded for to help replace Breece Hall, not be a complete replacement, but to then say, okay, we've got James Robinson, James Robinson, Michael Carter, and Ty Johnson. You figured Bam Knight is going to stick on the practice squad. You never even thought twice about it. They brought Bam Knight up for this game against the Bears and deactivated James Robinson, which was a surprise to a lot of people. And when Robert Saleh was asked about it, he said there was just something that they saw on the tape. They didn't like the way that the running game operated in the previous game against the Patriots, and they felt like Bam Knight was a more explosive player who could do more for them in that matchup. And so Bam Knight had a great game in his first ever NFL game, 14 carries, 69 yards, 3 catches, 34 yards, over 100 yards of total offense, which is the best any Jets rookie running back has done in their first game. And so going forward, it seems like they're going to play the matchups, which is smart coaching, I think, because you look at, okay, what does this team defend well? What does this team not defend well? And that's what they'll do with the running backs. I would expect that Michael Carter, when he's healthy, and as of now, as you said, very much up in the air whether he plays, that he'll be involved. Ty Johnson will get some carries. He played very well against the Bears. And then we'll see what happens with Bam Knight. Right now, he obviously is making a case that it's tough to deactivate him. James Robinson, does he stay deactivated if those 3 guys are playing well? It's really a mix and match, and it's sort of a TBD down the stretch of the season. Very different than what we expected to see when Breece Hall was starting to break out.
Okay, yeah. I mean, it kind of I guess a good problem to have given the amount of talent, the ability to play those matchups. I think a big part of this story with Mike White also has to do with how talented that receiving core is. Now, of course, him being able to enable that, in a big way is what kind of helps separate him right now from Zach Wilson. But, you mentioned that, Elijah Moore had been kind of clamoring for targets, wasn't getting them, finally gets them. We also saw, for example, Braxton Berrios being used in a bunch of interesting ways. But the headliner here, of course, is Garrett Wilson, who is nipping at the bud of his former teammate for Offensive Rookie of the Year. It is pretty interesting seeing kind of how this receiver class has developed. I don't think that it's gotten as much credit as maybe it deserves in terms of how well it's played thus far. But, certainly among the leaders of the pack is Garrett Wilson. What can this group provide? I didn't mention, Denzel Mims or Corey Davis too. What can this group provide, especially if it seems like the Jets might be limited to that kind of short passing game that you mentioned?
It's tough to get the recognition that you deserve when the receiving class the year before was Devontae Smith, Jalen Waddle, and Chase and Jamar Chase. That's the unfortunate part of this. So I think that's why. But it's funny with Garrett Wilson. I actually have Mike Davis, who is a really good wide receiver for the Texas Longhorns and played a little bit in the NFL with the Raiders. He was Garrett Wilson's personal mentor and coach when Garrett Wilson was in high school and then through college, and they remain very close now. And he's been on the show a bunch of times, and we'll talk about Garrett Wilson. And what he said to me before the season started was that Garrett Wilson to him was a cross between Justin Jefferson, who you know very well, and Stevie Johnson, who I'm sure you remember, a very...
Oh, man. One of my favorite route runners to watch. Maybe it took him 10 seconds to get open, but man, he was getting open.
That's right. And in fact, if you want to know all about how he got open, go talk to Darrelle Revis, because
the Darrelle Revis killer. Yeah, that's right.
He was one of the toughest matchups for Darrelle Revis. So Mike said to me, look, those are the 2 guys that I really think that he compares to, some sort of combination. And obviously,
pretty high
it's
praise.
Ridiculous to say, yeah, come on, Justin Jefferson. What are you talking about, Mike? But you watch him, and it's crazy. He gets open so quickly, that quick twitch. And then when he gets the ball in his hands, the thing that I think separates Garrett Wilson, there's 2 traits, really. The first is his ability to get open, and then the second is his ability to make things happen when the ball is either in the air or in his hands, right? So he was a basketball player, and a lot of people don't know this, but he was a really, really talented basketball player. His father, Kenny Wilson, was an NBA player, and Garrett Wilson himself was an excellent high school basketball player who was offered multiple scholarships to play basketball in college, including to the University of Texas. Rick Barnes really wanted him. But he decided that at 6 foot and about 180, 190 pounds, he probably had a better chance to get to the pros as a NFL wide receiver than an NBA player. And I think he probably wagered correctly, as we see. But his basketball background, Arif, really plays into his ability to do what he does, because that leaping ability, the ability to go up and get the ball like you would go up in basketball. And then when he gets the ball in his hands, I joked with Mike when the last time he was on the show, if you remember Darren Williams, he had that ridiculous crossover dribble when he was on the Utah Jazz, and then for a little bit when he was on the Nets, and he would just make guys fall flat on their face. Garrett Wilson will do that. If you go back and watch that game against the Bears, that 54-yard touchdown, he made a cut, and the guy basically just splat right on the ground. So that's what I think makes him so special and so tough to guard, because he gets open so quickly, and once he gets the ball, very tough to do anything with him. Elijah Moore, going into this season, everybody had such high hopes, because look at what he did last year. He's so fast. He's a great route runner. He's got great hands and all that. And if he'd been a couple inches taller, he probably would have been picked in the top 15. But then, as you said, he had the problems with Zach Wilson. He wasn't getting targeted, all that. Well, now if Mike White continues to play well, it looks like Elijah Moore has been unlocked. You put those two guys together, that's a really tough combination. And then Corey Davis, he's not an elite receiver. He was picked 5th overall in the draft years ago, and everybody expected him to be this top-tier guy. But he's become a pretty solid receiver, a guy who, on a good year, he could give you – he's never given you 1,000 yards, but he has that capability. He's not going to be a number 1 receiver, but he can maybe be a 2 or a 2B. And Denzel Mims been disappointing since drafted out of Baylor, but he's made some tough plays this year when given opportunities. It looked like he wasn't going to get into the lineup, Arif, because he was the odd man out with all these other guys in there now with the draft of Garrett Wilson. But when everything went down with Elijah Moore and he was being punished, Mims stepped up, had worked hard, earned more playing time, and he's made some really nice plays. So the receiving core that everybody expected to be really good this year is starting to really find itself, especially with Elijah Moore finally getting integrated into the offense. So it'll be fun to see what the Vikings try to do to stop that.
Right. So I think that a lot of these discussions, we love talking about these matchups, right? How's Garrett Wilson going to match up against Patrick Peterson? Are they going to move, some of these guys around? Elijah Moore is probably a pretty bad matchup for Chandon Sullivan, who has given up, I believe, the most slot yards in the NFL. These discussions are important, but, a lot of football is played in the trenches. We know that the Jets have an incredible defensive line. We'll get to that in a second. The offensive line, I think, is playing a lot better than people expected. You've got a 4th-round rookie at right tackle. I think it was supposed to be George Fant there. He's injured. Mm-hmm. You've got Dwayne Brown at left tackle. It's supposed to be Mekhi Becton. He's injured. Mm-hmm. You also have AVT, who the Vikings were quote-unquote supposed to draft. They ended up trading down and got Darrisaw instead. AVT is injured. Mm-hmm. But the offensive line seems to be holding up. What's going on? Who's Nate Herbig? Is Connor McGovern playing better at center for the Jets than he was with the Broncos? Laken Tomlinson, I remember him. How's he doing?
Yeah, it's crazy because this is one of those things that I think Joe Douglas really has done wonders with. Mike Maccagnan, the previous general manager, and Arif, I'll keep this brief because if you say the name Mike Maccagnan to me, I could write you a 100-page thesis on what a failure he was. But the offensive line was in such shambles under him. He made no major investments whatsoever in the offensive line. Once DeBrickashaw Ferguson and Nick Mangold retired, it just went to pieces. And when Douglas came in, one of the first things he said he wanted to do was rebuild this offensive line. So you mentioned Mekhi Becton. His first draft, he drafted Mekhi Becton number 11 overall. Now, unfortunately, the last 2 seasons, after having a really good rookie year, Becton had freak injuries. Last year, a teammate fell on him and shattered his kneecap in the first game. This year, his foot got caught in the turf at practice and ended up rupturing something, and now he's out for this year too. But he went out and he got Connor McGovern, who was a solid center with the Broncos, had a tough first year with the Jets, but he's really come into his own and played well. Nate Herbig is an interesting one. That's one of those, Arif, where sometimes having those connections come in very handy, because when Joe Douglas was with the Eagles, he helped recruit Nate Herbig as an undrafted free agent out of Stanford. And Herbig turned into a really nice piece for the Eagles. He was a spot starter, and he played at multiple positions on the interior offensive line and played well at all of them. And when he went to the Eagles this offseason and said, look, I'd like you to trade or release me. I'm just not going to be able to get playing time. This line has too many players. The Jets decided that they wanted to. Douglas talked to Herbig, and they decided it made sense for them to reunite, and the Jets claimed him off waivers. And boy, it's a good thing they did, because with all the injuries you just talked about, Herbig has been able to step in and play really well at guard, to the point where they have got to make him an off-season priority. Elijah Vera Tucker, before he got hurt, Arif, it's crazy, he played multiple different positions. So last year, he was the left guard. This year, because they signed Laken Tomlinson, they moved him to right guard. But then with all the injuries, with Becton and then Fant getting hurt and all of that, and then even Max Mitchell, their rookie right tackle, who was playing pretty well, he got hurt. He's back now, but he had gotten hurt. Their tackle depth was brutal. They had nobody left. So Vera Tucker, who had played left tackle at USC, they worked with him. They said, how would you feel about playing some left tackle? He said, fine. Went there, played left tackle, played really good. Dwayne Brown comes back healthy, and so now you have that void at right tackle when Max Mitchell gets hurt. They said, hey, I know you've never played right tackle before. What do you think? Sure. He goes over to right tackle, plays very well, and then unfortunately he gets hurt. But so some of these guys, it's been like a makeshift line, but because Joe Douglas built depth there, the type of depth that they hadn't had for years, they've been able to weather the storm of these injuries. And so now Max Mitchell is back, who's played well as a fourth-round rookie, and he's back at right tackle. Dwayne Brown stepping in for Mekhi Becton at left tackle. It was supposed to be Becton and Fant. Fant's still hurt, so you've got two guys that weren't supposed to be the starters at tackle. Herbig, an injury replacement for Elijah Vera Tucker, who had slid over to tackle to be an injury replacement for somebody else in the first place. Tomlinson, ironically, he was the big offseason signing, and he's played better, but he still hasn't quite lived up to the lofty Pro Bowl status that he'd had in San Francisco. So he's actually, him and McGovern are the only two guys that have been consistent on this line. The others have had to shift around because of injuries. So it's really remarkable that this line has been as decent as it has, considering all the turmoil. But I think it's really a credit to Joe Douglas and how much effort he put into building the offensive line and specifically the depth.
All right. That allows us to get over to that defensive line. Really interesting setup. So two rookies, one drafted, I want to say 26th overall, Jermaine Johnson, one drafted in the fourth round, Michael Clemens. Clemens having a really great year, especially for a rookie, but just kind of generally having a great year. Bryce Huff leading the league as in pass rush win rate. Primarily, third down is a little bit easier to win there, but that's really, really helpful. And then the starters, Carl Lawson playing really well. John Franklin Myers, in my opinion, playing well here. I guess Jets fans are not as enamored with him as I am. I think that he's playing really phenomenal football. So, there's a lot going on here, but, there are guys here where, if you plop them as starters on other teams, you wouldn't necessarily be upset. And that doesn't even touch. Quinnen Williams is playing like the best defensive tackle in football. Basically, you can put him in the same sentence as Aaron Donald right now, which is just nuts stuff. Sheldon Rankins might be coming back. He had some pretty good years in New Orleans. Solomon Thomas is being used correctly. There's a lot going on in this defensive line, and it's not just talented at its starting group. It seems to be talented throughout its depth.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. And I think that's a big part of what Robert Saleh likes. We were all kind of screaming about it at the beginning of the year. He's got this rotation. His idea is you keep these guys fresh by not overusing them. And at first it was, why are you doing this? Quinnen Williams is your best player. You should be playing him 90% of the snaps. But what you're seeing is that front seven has been outstanding. Their pass rush is the best that it's been in years. They're getting pressure from the inside. They're getting pressure from the outside. Quinnen Williams, as you said, Arif, just a quick thing to toot my own horn here. In 2019, I was one of a handful of people that was screaming with a megaphone as loud as I could that the Jets at number 3 should draft, when it looked like it was going to be Kyler Murray at number 1, that Bosa and Quinnen Williams were so clearly far above everybody else in that draft. don't trade down, stay at 3, and pick whichever guy falls to you. And so when Quinnen fell, I said, look, the Jets just got themselves a guy who can be an absolutely elite player. And he had some injuries and then some scheme changes, and I don't think Greg Williams really used them all that well. He used them to stunt a lot. And so a lot of Jets fans were down on Quinnen and said, this is the guy that was the number 3 overall pick. As you said, though, this year he has been absolutely lights out. He's been one of the best defensive players in the league. I think he's going to be a legitimate contender for Defensive Player of the Year. And as you said, you could make a strong case that he's the best interior defender in the entire NFL this year. John Franklin Myers, the interesting thing about him is he got paid last year during the season, and he's played well. I think he's played a lot better when he's been inside than outside. I think they do him a disservice when they use him on the edge. But the good thing is, as you mentioned, Arif, the Jets really bolstered that edge rush. Carl Lawson, who was the big offseason signing last year but got hurt in the preseason, he's back this year, and he's played really well. Got off to a bit of a slow start. You kind of expect that when a guy's coming back from an Achilles injury, but he's been really, really good the last few weeks. Jermaine Johnson, he's not putting up eye-catching numbers. He's got a couple of sacks, which is pretty good for a guy in a rotation his rookie year, but he's made a lot of really big plays. If you go back and watch the Bills game, he made a play that may have saved the game when Josh Allen got outside the pocket. He was able to stop him from picking up a first down, and that was exactly the type of play that they envisioned when they drafted him out of Florida State. Bryce Huff is interesting, too, because earlier in the year, a lot of Jets fans were upset that he wasn't even getting active. He wasn't being played at all. And Robert Saleh's excuse at the time was, we want a guy that can give us 3 downs. But the thing with Bryce Huff is, as you said, he's number 1 in the NFL in pass rush win rate. And it's because he does one thing and he does it well. He gets to the quarterback. Now, he's not a guy you're going to play 3 downs, but what's the most important thing for an edge rusher to be able to do? Get to the quarterback. So when you have a guy like him that can do that at the rate that he does, use him. And they started to use him the last few weeks, and he's been very, very effective. Solomon Thomas has been decent in terms of the rotation and all of that. And so what you've seen, and Sheldon Rankins has been very effective when he's played too. You've seen them really build again. Depth is the key word with this team. It's interesting because the Jets had the worst defense in the league last year, and then everybody was questioning the first few weeks. They got off to a rough start, but then it's been lights out ever since. And if you look at what happened when Robert Saleh showed up in San Francisco, that defense was a mess year 1. Year 2, they invested. They got some players in the draft and in free agency. Saleh was able to put his stamp on everything, and they built that 49ers defense into maybe the best in the league that year. Same thing seems to be going on with the Jets here. The infusion of talent and the coaching from Robert Saleh and Jeff Ulbrich have been outstanding this year. That defense is, I would say, as good as just about any other defense in the league so far.
So you mentioned that this really has enabled the entire front 7. We were talking about the defensive line, but I think we've seen some improvement or surprising play. I don't know how, the best way to describe it, from, Quincy Williams and CJ Mosley. Mosley, who, had a good couple of years with the Ravens and then kind of disappointed to finish out his rookie contract, signed a really big contract with the Jets. I don't know that he lived up to that contract initially, but now seems to be playing lights out. What's going on? Is it just because of how excellently the front 4 in front of them are playing, or kind of what's happening with this Quincy Williams, CJ Mosley combination? Also, when Williams was injured, we saw Quan Alexander come in. He played really well too.
Quan Alexander's made some big plays, and it's that speed with Quan Alexander. You've seen it over and over again for years. He just has incredible speed for a guy his size at his position. Quincy Williams is interesting because when he was on the Jacksonville Jaguars, he ended up getting released, and he's Quinnen Williams' younger brother, for anybody that doesn't know that. And so he was brought in here, and last year, the thing with Quincy Williams is you could see some potential. He was tough. He would make these big tackles, but he had a lot of bad habits. He would over pursue. He didn't seem to know where he was on the field a lot of times. Awareness wasn't there. But what you heard consistently from Robert Saleh and from Jeff Ulbrich was that they really thought that they could take this kid and mold him into an excellent player. And look, let's look at Robert Saleh's history here. one perfect example. Now, I'm not trying to say Quincy Williams is ever going to be this good, but look at Fred Warner. That's a guy that was picked, I believe, in the 5th round by the 49ers, and look at what Robert Saleh was able to do in developing him into one of the best inside linebackers in the league. So they believe they can get Quincy Williams to a really high level. Now, he's still got some of those bad habits, but he's starting to shake some of them. And look, he's not all the way there yet. He's still got plenty of flaws, but for a guy that they got off the waiver wire and who's more or less been project that they've been trying to mold from clay, he's been pretty useful this year. He's gotten better as the year's gone on. CJ Mosley's interesting too, because I think there are times where he plays at a Pro Bowl level and he looks like his old self, but then there are times where, for example, in this game against the Bears, he got beat really badly on a pass. I believe it was a quick running back screen to David Montgomery, and he just couldn't get him. And so there are times like that where Mosley looks slow and he looks older, but his leadership has been so important for this defense as well. He's been one of the glue pieces, the glue guys in that defense, in addition to being their best linebacker. And so while I don't know that he's going to be here for many, many more years to come, I think his impact will be felt because a lot of these younger players, you talked about Michael Clemens before, who I glossed over and I shouldn't have, because as you said, he's had a really, really good rookie year as a rotational edge guy. And he also happens to be one of the scariest human beings you will ever see. And he, by all accounts, he's a very friendly guy. He's just a massive, gigantic man. And he's not a guy you want to mess with. I think his teammates actually call him Debo, and his nickname in college at Texas A&M was the Cyclops. And if you take a look at him, Google Michael Clemens, you'll see immediately why they called him Cyclops. These guys all look to CJ Mosley, and he's been really an incredibly important piece in that defense for that reason. Even though his play sometimes slips a little bit, he's been an absolutely essential element for that leadership, in addition to some of the big plays that he's made.
All right. I think that leads us into probably the most exciting, maybe not the most talented, but certainly up there, one of the most exciting units on the Jets. It's that cornerback group, that safety group, the entire kind of defensive back arena. We're starting with probably one of the most interesting players to watch, Sauce Gardner. Already getting your money's worth on that first round pick. He's already playing like one of the best quarterbacks in football, much less, one of the best cornerback rookies that we've seen. After we saw, Pat Surtain last year play at a really high level, to see someone come in, do it even better, right, is really exciting. But beyond that, DJ Reed is playing at an extraordinary level at cornerback next to him. Michael Carter is playing really well at the nickel. Jordan Whitehead knows how to make, plays. I don't think that he's the league's best safety or anything like that, but certainly he'll show up from time to time making some really enormous plays for the Jets. So this seems like a defensive back group that, if you want to watch sparks fly, it's probably you want to watch this one because, Sauce Gardner moves really well. DJ Reed plays really smartly. Michael Carter, has been playing, I think, a lot better than last year. I know he's a 5th round pick, so judging him on his rookie year seems kind of harsh, but I think that was a concern. Now in the nickel, he seems to be playing pretty well. He'll be matching up against Justin Jefferson, Adam Thielen, and KJ Osborne, or whoever lines up out wide, I guess, is who Sauce Gardner takes. But can you tell me a little bit about kind of what this defense is and how it kind of enables Robert Saleh's whole setup?
Yeah, it's funny because in a lot of ways we talked about the pass rush. Most teams, the pass rush sets up the secondary, but with the Jets, a lot of times the secondary sets up the pass rush. That's how talented they are, and that's how good they've been. And you mentioned DJ Reed and Sauce Gardner, and they signed Jordan Whitehead as their strong safety. They took him away from the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. They've got LaMarcus Joyner there, who was initially signed last year, but then got injured and signed back on a cheap 1-year deal to come in and compete at free safety. The funny thing is, Arif, last year the Jets had the worst secondary in the league. They had the worst safeties, and their cornerback play was terrible. And the funny thing is, Jets fans tricked themselves into thinking that the corners were actually fine and that Robert Saleh doesn't value corners. In his scheme, you don't really need corners, we were told 1,000 times. Which, of course, Arif, you know this. There's not a single scheme in the history of football that doesn't value good corners, right? And so you had Bryce Hall, who had been a 5th-round pick a couple of years prior, and they drafted Brandon Eccles in the 6th round last year. And those guys, they did an admirable job, but the truth of the matter is they're just they're depth pieces and they're not good enough to be starting caliber corners. And I kept trying to tell Jets fans this. They didn't want to listen to me. And I said, look, they're going to have to make an investment. And again, oh, no, you don't need corners in Robert Saleh's system and Bryce Hall. Well, okay, what did the Jets do the first opportunity they got? They went out and they paid DJ Reed. And so it was, oh, they got DJ Reed. That's good. He can compete with those two guys. I'm like, he doesn't have to compete with those two guys. You guys need to watch DJ Reed. Now, in fairness, I didn't realize how good DJ Reed was. I knew he was pretty solid, but then when the Jets signed him, I really started to watch his tape and I said, wow, this guy's really good. And then I remember talking to Corbin Smith, who covers the Seahawks for SI, and I said, hey, Corbin, what can you tell me about DJ Reed? And he goes, oh, man, you guys got a good one. And then I remember looking at all the articles out of Seattle and a lot of the fan reaction, and they were all really upset that he was gone, which usually is a good sign for the team that picks him up. And he's been outstanding. I mean, he has played pretty much at a Pro Bowl level. And Sauce Gardner, I was telling people the whole time, they were getting mad at me. Oh, you can't pick a cornerback at number 4. Unless
the defense doesn't need corners. Why would you pick a cornerback?
Exactly, Arif. It was a wasted pick. There were actually people saying it would be a wasted pick if you took a corner. And so, which made me laugh. But the thing about it was I kept telling people, I said, look, if the Jets don't like Kayvon Thibodeau, which clearly they did not, the answer there is you got to take Sauce. He's too good. And yes, they do need corners, despite apparently popular Jet fan sentiment. And so I don't think a lot of people look. I loved Sauce. I thought he was the best corner in the country. I actually was way early on that. I was saying it in like November. Myself and Kayla Pace, who does a lot of work for us at Play Like a Jet as well. And so when they picked him, I was really happy. I thought he would be, develop eventually into one of the top corners in the league. I didn't think he was going to be one of the top corners in the league like day one.
Right away. Yeah.
Who would ever think that? I mean, to be able to do what he's done, doing maybe the toughest thing in football, which is man coverage. I mean, that's incredible to be able to do what he's done. And so when you take those two guys and then the upgraded safety with Whitehead, who got off to a really rough start, but has really started to play a lot better. LaMarcus Joyner, he's not been great, but at least he's better than he was at the beginning of the season. All of a sudden, that secondary, which was the worst in the league last year and a massive liability, has become one of the best in the league and probably the team's greatest strength. So it's crazy how, like I said with Robert Saleh, when he was able to put his stamp on the team, get in guys and have an influx of talent at these positions, how quickly it turned around. And so I'm really looking forward to seeing DJ Reed, Sauce Gardner going up against guys like Thielen, going up against clearly Justin Jefferson, who I think may very well be the best receiver in football. It's probably either him or Tyreek Hill at this point. So it really is crazy to think about where the Jets secondary was last year and people yelling at me that they didn't need, even though they were the 32nd best pass defense, Arif, people telling me they didn't need corners. And then now to have arguably the best 1-2 punch a corner in the league with those two guys, it's crazy.
That's wild. That's wild. Well, so when you take a look at, after all this discussion going through all of those position groups, when you take a look at like what the Vikings have to offer, whether it's Justin Jefferson or Dalvin Cook, or, if Christian Darrisaw is healthy enough to play, which seems pretty unlikely at this point, but, taking a look at that offensive line, taking a look at Kirk Cousins, what kind of concerns you the most? Where do you think the Jets' biggest opportunities are? What kind of is the pathway for the Vikings to beat the Jets on both offense and defense? And what are kind of the biggest mistakes the Vikings could make?
I think offensively, what the Vikings can do is the middle of the field sometimes can be a problem, because we talked about the linebackers, but sometimes the linebackers and the safeties have trouble clamping down in the middle of the field. This has been the case quite a few times this season. The Bears actually exploited it early with, of all people, Trevor Siemian. Running backs have been able to do things, so Dalvin Cook could be trouble for the Jets. Not necessarily him running the ball. I think he could be a threat, over the middle of the field. Same thing with TJ Hawkinson. He could be a problem for the Jets. That's where teams have seemed to be able to move the ball the best, is in the middle of the field. So I think if Kirk Cousins can do that, then that'll give the Vikings their best chance to do something against the Jet defense. Defensively, I think the key here is going to be forcing Mike White to have to throw deep. Because, as I said, if you go back and look at his scouting report, in college, he apparently did it well at Western Kentucky, but we have not seen him have to do that much in the NFL with the Jets in his limited sample size. We know that he's been very effective with the quick strike offense, getting rid of the ball fast, getting completions to the running backs, moving the chains with 6-yard passes, 10-yard passes, so on and so forth. If they can take that away and get him out of his comfort zone, that would probably be the best way to make Mike White, I guess, falter. And like I said, he will throw into tight windows. He will make risky throws. If they can get him off his game and get some of those throws that just slightly went through guys' hands last week to now end up being interceptions, that could be a formula for the Vikings. And then on the other end of it with the Jets, the question becomes, obviously, can they stop guys like Justin Jefferson and Adam Thielen? Like I said, the best formula has been over the middle, but when you have guys like Justin Jefferson and Adam Thielen, can the Jets stop those guys? That's going to be interesting. So there's so many fascinating matchups here between two teams that a lot of people, as you said, I don't want to say it's a prove-it game, but these are two teams that a lot of people at different points in the season have said, I don't think they're as good as their record indicates. They might be somewhat fraudulent. And now you know clearly what the Vikings' strengths are. You know clearly what the Jets' strengths are. Which one's going to win out?
All right. Well, that allows us to get into some game predictions. I think, obviously it's always really difficult to figure out what the score of the game will be, but it's always kind of fun to figure out, kind of distill all of this down into kind of which team can come out ahead, whether that's because of matchups or because of pure talent. Vikings, I believe, are favored by 3. What is kind of your thought on the line and your thought on the game in general? Who do you think is going to win? By how much? Give us a score, that sort of stuff.
It's interesting because, Arif, we were talking about this on Play Like a Jet when you came on. The way the Vikings have been winning is just not sustainable in so many different ways. And they only have 2 losses, but in both losses, they got beat up pretty bad. They got destroyed by the Cowboys and they got beat up pretty good by the Eagles. And so you look at that and you then take a look at the fact that the Vikings, all of their wins have been pretty close. I think if not all of them, almost all of them have been by 1 score, right? 7-8 points at most. And so you think that line makes a lot of sense because the 3-point favorite means that neutral field, it would be a pick 'em, right? And so even though the Vikings have a better record and all that, they've been winning in this unsustainable way. And they, as you said, know that they're not even really playing that well and they're kind of getting away with it. Whereas the Jets have played very well, particularly on defense, but on offense, it's been shaky. And though Mike White played well last week, you don't know necessarily what to expect from him. So there's a lot up in the air here. I think as far as how this game goes, really what it's going to come down to is which team can force the other out of its comfort zone. And I think really it's weird because, as I said, they've only lost 2 games, but both of them were blowouts and all the wins were close. Could this be their first close loss? Or could this be another game where the Vikings win by 1 score? I think that's fairly likely. I think the fact that they're at home gives them the edge. It gives any team an edge. And so if they win, I think it very well could be by 1 score. If you were to ask me, I would say that the likely result here is, and this is going to sound kind of like a cop-out, but I'm just basing it on what we've seen so far. Either Mike White plays another great game, and we know the Vikings' pass defense is okay, but not great. If he's able to get things going and the Jets really get on the board and get a bunch of points, and on the other end, the defense is able to at least limit Justin Jefferson and Dalvin Cook, maybe the Jets are able to run away with this thing. Or the other scenario is that it's a back and forth battle between 2 teams that are kind of trying to find their footing. And one of them comes out with a 3.7 point win, something like that. I suppose it's certainly possible that the Vikings could run away with it too, because with Kirk Cousins and Justin Jefferson and Dalvin Cook, anything is possible. With that Jets defense, knock on wood, I don't want to jinx it, but they've been very good this year. So you would think it's probably not going to be a Vikings blowout, but anything could happen. I would say, man, if you're putting me on the spot, I would, and maybe I'm doing a reverse jinx here. I'm going to say that the Vikings win a close one and beat the Jets, but I think it could go either way. And obviously, like I said, I'm semi-reverse jinxing this here, hoping that by predicting the Vikings, it means the Jets will win.
Right, of course. Real quick before I drop in my score prediction, it is maybe not a revenge game or anything like that, because I don't expect any of these players to play, but Drew Samia on the PUP list, former Viking. Rodney Adams, non-football injury, former Viking. I believe it's the same Rodney Adams. Chess Rat on the practice squad, former Viking. Just, guys that might have some intel or something like that. Probably not all that useful, but, just something to keep in mind. I always like looking at former Vikings on these rosters. Plus, former Minnesota Gophers quarterback / CFL quarterback Chris Streppler.
No, and let's not forget Tyler Conklin, right?
Tyler Conklin.
That's a big one. We did a show on him. Remember, you came on the show on Play Like Tyler Conklin. So.
I skipped right over the tight ends, so I didn't even talk about him in the bid, just because the tight ends have been, I don't want to say disappointing or anything like that, but have been kind of hidden a little bit. Though you've mentioned, I think, on the show that they've kind of most recently have done a little bit more, at least in the passing game, maybe not as blockers, but certainly a couple of fun storylines. I think that most of the storyline comes from the Justin Jefferson Sauce Gardner matchup, so it'll be fun to see that. My score prediction, they just barely covered the spread, but they hit the under. It's 21-17 Vikings. Probably the first time the Vikings defense really shows up in a big way, aside from the Packers game, I suppose. And it should be, I think, a pretty fun matchup to watch. You don't usually get that with cross-conference teams. Where can people find you?
Yeah, well, first of all, by the way, I just have to say this because I don't want Tyler Conklin and CJ Uzomah to get mad at me if they hear this and say I didn't defend them. Of course, I have to assume they're listening, right? Because why wouldn't they be listening to you, Arif? Everybody should be. They actually have done a really good job run blocking. They did a particularly nice job against the Bears this past week. And while Conklin was disappointing early in the season, a lot of drops, a couple of fumbles, he had a pretty good game this past week with Mike White behind center, and he's made some nice plays. Not quite what the Jets were expecting, but him and Uzomah certainly have been an upgraded tight end, even if neither one of them has been like a number one caliber tight end. As far as where you can find me, the show is available 7 days a week, 365 days a year. I know I'm an insane lunatic, and it's probably why I'm going to wind up in the loony bin at some point doing 365-day-a-year Jet podcasts. Play Like Jet is anywhere where you download podcasts, so Spotify, Stitcher, Google Play, Apple, any place you get it. On Twitter at PlayLikeAJet1, PlayLikeAJet.com. We've got written material, our YouTube channel, YouTube.com/PlayLikeAJet. The Thunder from Down Under, Luke Grant does a lot of great all 22 breakdowns on there. So there's a lot of different places to find the show, to find the videos, to find the written material, to check out my thoughts in tweet form. And Arif, I'm glad that we were able to talk about this and that we could do, I guess you would call it a home and home in NBA terms.
Yeah.
You came on Play Like a Jet, and I came on here, and I'm hoping that we get a really good game. Like I told you the other day, I'm hoping that you and I are texting back and forth during the game about how good that Sauce Gardner Justin Jefferson matchup is. Because if you forget about Minnesota and the Jets, if you're a football fan, that's the marquee matchup right there.
Yeah, it should be a ton of fun to see that all play out. All right, thanks so much for coming on. We'll send some people your way and make sure that you get your money's worth coming on this podcast, and hopefully we can get a couple of people to listen to the insight that you have to provide. Thank you so much.
All right, let's go to the mailbag, and the first question is from Eric Thompson, who asks, does Matt Daniels need an OnlyFans account for his extremely horny answers about his special teams players?
So Matt Daniels said earlier today, we're recording on Thursday, on Kenny Longu's kick return touchdown. It's kind of like me and Kenny have been in a dating phase, just talking back and forth, really not on the same page, trying to figure it out. Finally, it connected. We meshed well. Uh, Earlier, he was talking about Jalen Rager's. I didn't remember the exact quote, but it sounded like juicy thighs, basically, was what he was saying, functionally.
Yeah.
So, no, this guy is eternally horny for special teams, which I don't know if you could ever ask for a better special teams coach than that, honestly. But no, I don't think that that's ever going to resolve itself.
Probably not. No. Let's go to Justice Mosqueda, who asks, "Is this team the fraud of the century or of the millennia?"
The Packers? Oh, the millennia, I think. Yeah.
I was about to say, like, which team are you talking about? Because I remember we've talked about on the show that Packers team that went what 14-2, 13-3. That
yeah, 13-3.
Yeah, that was way worse than their record, and deserved every little bit of the butt kicking they got in the playoffs. So
yeah, yep.
Hey, we've already won a Super Bowl this year. What?
Yeah, what are the Packers going to do?
We're playing with house money. Like, we're fine.
Yeah.
Jack Rackham asks, did Dalvin Cook and Oli Udoh's off-the-field issues just evaporate, or were there actual resolutions that I missed?
So there haven't been, like, legal resolutions. So it's two completely different situations. Dalvin Cook, it is with a former partner of his, and it is not a criminal trial. It is entirely a civil trial. It's a suit and a countersuit. The lawyer for Dalvin Cook has indicated that one of the suits, or maybe both suits, I'm not 100% sure how civil litigation works, will go to trial in August 2023. And there are a couple of important distinctions. One, obviously, with a civil suit, there is no risk of you going to jail. Second, civil suits are largely not very enforceable, although with large enough amounts, you can figure out a way to do that. Third, the standard of evidence is significantly different in a civil suit, which is why it would make sense to engage in a countersuit. It is basically a 51% chance. I mean, this is a huge dumbing down. I'm not a lawyer. But for most civil suits, not all of them, for most civil suits, they use what's called a preponderance of evidence standard, which is basically, is it more likely than not that the defendant had committed whatever civil violation it was. It has not, from my understanding, gone to any sort of criminal proceeding. No one has filed a criminal suit, either Dalvin Cook or the other person. And the reason I would say neither Dalvin Cook or the other person is that, famously Adam Schefter tweeted out that Dalvin Cook was the victim of domestic violence from his former partner without providing the additional context that his former partner was also accusing Dalvin Cook of the same thing. It's a very complicated situation. Dalvin Cook has a history of off-field issues that have largely not been significant problems. He was, as a sophomore, accused of punching a woman in a bar, a woman that he didn't know. It was resolved. Florida State, the players tend to get away with a little bit more than you'd expect, but in this case, it looked like there was a significant amount of evidence, including video evidence, that exonerated Dalvin Cook. I believe he was breaking up a fight, right? And then there was some stuff before he came to Florida State in high school, left a dog inappropriately tied up to a tree. It was with a chain instead of a leash. Not good stuff, right? But not stuff that's kind of, there's this history here, right? That is something that will continue to play out. It looks like they'll be playing out privately instead of publicly. It's a difficult enough case where we don't have very much information. With Oli Udoh, the Vikings are extremely confident that this will resolve in Udoh's favor. And they didn't say the sort of thing with Dalvin Cook. Obviously, the Vikings, cut Jeff Gladney right away when they basically saw the extent of the allegations against him. That was later dropped, and then Jeff Gladney later passed away. But with Oli Udoh, so he's accused of confronting a woman who's in line at the bathroom of a nightclub and then following her in, and I believe also accused of not letting her out of the bathroom. The lawyer for the case says that the woman in question is not filing charges, and in fact is willing to testify on Oli Udo's behalf that they exchanged numbers and were very cordial and that nothing happened. Because there's no history of relationship between Oli Udo and this woman, it would seem unlikely that a lot of the traditional abuse dynamics are at play. I'm trying to choose my words carefully here. But, some of the other stuff that might be at play with regards to, when a high-profile person is charged with violence against women, may still be in play. But it very much seems like this is a situation where a lot of the parties involved seem pretty confident that nothing happened. I can't speak to whether or not that's actually the case, but the Vikings are much more confident than I've seen a team be when it comes to like a backup being accused of something that has been a fairly high profile thing to be accused of and to harm you in some way. They've not been resolved. The resolutions haven't happened yet. We'll see how the Oli Udo story evolves, but my guess is that charges will eventually be dropped if all they have is, police testimony. If they have video evidence, maybe that changes. But certainly they don't seem to have testimony. And it could be, a different woman came forward to vouch for him, and maybe the woman that was the subject of the alleged, I don't even know if assault's the right word, comes forward. It might be a different woman, right? So I don't know, right? Who knows? But they've not evaporated. And I believe that Rackham might be asking this question because the Deshaun Watson stuff came up, and I wrote a piece about Deshaun Watson. This is not me saying that Rackham was wrong to ask these questions or anything like that. It's just, this seems to be kind of like, hey, this maybe reminded you. If so, I guess that actually is fair and makes sense. The thing with the Deshaun Watson stuff is just, it is so clear to me that Deshaun Watson is definitely in the wrong, from my opinion, obviously. This is not me reporting, just to be clear. That Deshaun Watson is in the wrong, that he has demonstrated absolutely no understanding of the issues at play, that his remorse has been disingenuine, and that the NFL has acted abhorrently in this situation. Judge Sue Robinson said that the behavior that Deshaun Watson had engaged in, according to her, was the most egregious pattern of behavior in player misconduct history that she had seen. So it strikes me as a lot different in this case. So, fair enough to ask these questions. I don't think we've been as diligent about talking about Dalvin Cook as we could be, but it is also a little bit of a different situation than it is with Deshaun Watson.
Yeah, when we announced it initially, when the news had come out, we basically said matter of factly, this is what we know, and we know absolutely nothing else, and we're not going to know anything else for probably another year while this thing tries to resolve itself. So yeah, that was about as good as we had, and that's basically where we're still at now. Jack,
if one of the lawyers decides to play it out publicly, we might talk about it if it makes sense to talk about it. But we also don't want to just be manipulated by trial lawyers,
Right, exactly. Jack asks, based off their play, is it becoming more likely that we move on from both Harrison Smith and Kendricks this offseason due to their cap hits? Or has their play been trending upwards in the past few weeks? Is their poorer play just another byproduct of the scheme, or are they not adapting?
So I don't necessarily reject the premise that they're not playing as well as they did. I believe that they are not playing as well as they have in the past, but I wouldn't say that they're playing poorly. I think both of them are in fact playing very well. The problem is, how much is that worth versus the type of player that you thought you were paying for, and what is their upcoming cap hit? And the cap hit, especially for Harrison Smith, is really significant. So for Eric Kendricks, the cap hit in 2023 is $11.4 million. He does not have an extension beyond that, and so you don't really have to worry about kind of the long-term ramifications. It is not completely unguaranteed, but the vast majority of it is basically all he has guaranteed is a prorated signing bonus. So the actual cash flow is not guaranteed for him. So he actually takes up a smaller percentage of the cap next year than he does this year. So that actually might resolve in his favor for the Vikings. I don't know, but I think that he is playing well enough that a 5% cap hit is actually not that significant. Now, Harrison Smith, that is kind of a brutal situation. So his cap hit this year is great. It's $7 million. He's actually playing up to that level. That's not a huge issue. That's 3.5% of the cap. I don't have a problem with that. In fact, I think the Vikings are getting value for money for this year for the type of player that he is and that he's put forth. But his cap hit next year and the following year, so 2023 and 2024, is $19.2 million, which is 8.5% of the cap. And that is way too much to stomach. I think that's probably too much for Harrison Smith at his peak, maybe. But it certainly is too much for Harrison Smith as he's playing now. I think part of the reason that both Eric Kendricks and especially Harrison Smith are not playing up to the level that we're used to seeing, aside from age. I mean, Harrison Smith is 33, Eric Kendricks is 30. Aside from age, which is definitely playing a role, I think, especially for Harrison Smith, is that with the responsibilities being tasked for him in this defense, do not take advantage of a skill set in a really significant way. And so you're seeing a lot fewer safety blitzes because the scheme does not have in it a lot of that available to it, right? Because there has to be some level of too high safety looks at all times. Not that they'll always be in too high safety after the snap, but before the snap, they will basically show that they're too high. Now, Harrison Smith plays a little bit shallower than Cameron Bynum, so he can kind of make up for the fact that it is more difficult to blitz from that position, so he can be a blitz threat, but they haven't been blitzing him all that often. And, they're just not letting him freelance in the way that we're kind of used to seeing. Like when Troy Polamalu freelances, he did it primarily out of a cover 4 defense, which is very similar to what the Vikings do now. But they kind of just let him do their own thing, and other defenders would sometimes, change their assignment based off of what Polamalu was doing on the field. That's just not in kind of the book here for Harrison Smith. So because of that, because you basically need a little bit less out of your safeties, if the scheme doesn't change in year 2, and I think it could, but if the scheme doesn't change in year 2, I don't see how you could keep Harrison Smith at that cap hit. But I also don't think so. A lot of that cap hit is because his base salary jumps up really significantly. A good chunk of that base salary is guaranteed, right? So he's got about $4 million in prorated signing bonus. I think another $7 million of his salary, of his base salary, is guaranteed. If you take all of the unguaranteed stuff, turn it into a signing bonus again, and basically push it down the road 3-4 years, you can reduce his cap hit probably by from 19 million to 9 million essentially. But you would have to guarantee additional money to him to be able to do that. You can do that. I don't know, if they would just kind of rather let a 33-year-old go instead of committing to a significant amount of guaranteed money for somebody that's probably not going to be there at the end of that contract. But it is possible to keep him without even having to do much of a negotiation. They could also just negotiate, right, and get an extension that's going to be a little bit more team-friendly without having to do all this automatic converting stuff into signing bonus stuff. But, I think that we're not going to see Harrison Smith at his current contract next year, but we might see him at a different contract, or the Vikings might let go. The problem is cutting him next year is also difficult because of all the prorated signing bonus that they had already committed to. So tough to kind of fully diagnose or break down everything involved there, but the Kendricks stuff is not a big of an issue. I think that more likely than not, Kendricks will actually want an extension, whereas Harrison Smith probably doesn't, because an extension is probably going to reduce the amount of cash that flows into his bank account. But we'll see.
Well, next question is going to be from Kenneth Allen, who asks, as of week 12, the Vikings ranked 22nd in DVOA. I think many of us agree that the Vikings aren't as good as their record, but where would Arif rank them? Are they really a bottom 11 team? What about the bottom half?
It was really interesting because when people just kind of talk about, hey, who are the best teams in the AFC or in the NFC? There's basically 3 teams that get consistent play ahead of the Vikings. The Eagles, obviously, the Cowboys, and after they've played the Vikings with good reason, and the 49ers, which I think there's a good case to be made. It's not like the 49ers are absolutely slaying it, but a lot of people would take the 49ers over the Vikings. Okay, so then who's the fourth best team in the NFC? If you're the fourth best team in the NFC, is that better than, say, the sixth best team in the AFC? Probably not. So you're probably looking at 10 above you, no matter what. And then from there, you kind of have to sort it out if the Vikings are better than the seventh best team in the AFC, or if they are the fourth best team in the NFC after all, who knows? And I would say that it is tough to separate the NFC teams. It really is. I'd say that the Vikings are better than the Giants. I'd say that the Vikings are better than the Jets. But I would say they're still probably overall like a 16th, 17th ranked team, maybe 15th, somewhere in that kind of middle range where, the ball bounced their way a couple of times and now they've got a couple of extra wins. It's tough. DVOA is a really nice measure for a couple of reasons. One is that essentially what it does is it combines success rate and explosiveness and weights them for their impact on winning football games. So a success in that, they use a really old school definition of success. Actually, I think first developed by former quarterback Virgil Carter back in 1979, where the first a first down gets you 40% of the required yards to convert, a second down gets you 60% of the required yards to convert, and a third down gets you 100%, as does a fourth down. So those are successes. And then explosiveness, plays, above 10 or 15 yards or whatever it is, right? So they can kind of combine those two into one metric, and then they adjust for the quality of the opponent that they play. Really nice. The Vikings are in a weird spot where if you probably did a more honest opponent quality assessment, you'd actually probably rank them down, not up. But I still don't think, or because they've played a lot of backup quarterbacks that do not constitute the quality of the teams that whose name is on the schedule. Like, so for example, the Miami Dolphins count as a very high quality opponent for the Vikings, but anybody who watched that game knows that was not the Dolphins team that is playing very well right now, in part because of the backup quarterback problem that the Vikings have had this entire season, right? They barely didn't get to play Bailey Zappi. They barely didn't get to play whoever the backup is in Dallas now. I told Cooper Rush.
I
thought you were going to go straight to Carson Wentz.
They they didn't get to play Carson Wentz. But they for the most part have played backup or backup quality quarterbacks, people that you wouldn't have expected to be there at the start of the season. So, which the opponent adjustments don't take into account. They look at the season long performance of those opponents. So that would ratchet them down. But you take a look at some other measures and you ratchet them back up. I think that, for example, Kirk Cousins does better in completion percentage over expected than he does in expected points added. Both of those are very strong indicators of future performance and have a strong relationship to future wins, even if they don't have an enormous relationship to current wins, right? And so, that helps. I think that in terms of, close game record, or if you get rid of, if you treat all close games as ties, which is a pretty quick heuristic, they'd be average. If you take a look at point differential, they'd be average. If you take a look at opponent adjusted to point differential, they'd be average. So you take a look at some of these other metrics that think that the Vikings are not as good as the winning record. They're not as harsh as 22nd. There's a reason to pull it down. There's a reason to pull it up. My basic gut feeling is that they're probably 14th or 15th. But, when you've got some level of home field advantage in the playoffs, and in a weak NFC, there's a decent chance the Vikings could end up winning out the wild card and playing a divisional round and then hosting that divisional round and then winning that divisional round before they get into the conference championship game, despite not being, a team that has kind of the foundation of a traditional Super Bowl winning team.
Well, let's go to the next question, and that's going to be also from Kenneth Allen, who delves a little bit deeper into some of the stuff you were talking about. The analytics revolution has led to basically every team in the NFL employing analytics personnel. Will the success of teams like the Vikings lead to a similar witchcraft revolution with other teams employing spellcasters of various sorts to improve their teams?
So the issue, of course, is that just like when teams first developed analytics departments, they didn't really know how to build them in ways that were effective. They didn't know kind of what are the tools that you need, what are the skills you need to have, what are what types of domain knowledge are better for you or worse for you. Basically, it was an immature, departmental doctrine, right? It was not developed very well. They didn't have clear lines of communication between, coaches and front offices and the analytics staff or the analytics staffer most often. And they would just hire like, hey, you're a data scientist from Yale. We'll hire you. And then they would do some big data stuff, and it wouldn't be very useful for football. As time has gone on, they've done a better job integrating those departments. My worry is that, if teams invest in witchcraft, they will hire baby witches with impressive resumes. They will go after warlocks who've made deals with interplanar beings. They'll, go after, wild magic sorcerers, right? Like it would be tough for them to kind of figure out what they need in order to successfully run a department like that. But I think that we're not on the verge of that because, as much as we've talked about it on this podcast, not a lot of people have brought up, although it is happening. I saw what Nick Wright from Fox Sports, tweeted something about witchcraft, right? But not many people have made it a national conversation about how the Vikings have employed spell casting. So I don't think we're on the verge of that. If we are, be prepared to see all kinds of chaos as teams don't even know what the criteria should be for who they hire to run their Magic's department.
Exactly. Roro asks, Jets. What's the best and worst crowd chant in NFL football?
I love that. I really don't like the Jets chant. It's like some stuff from like the 60s and 70s is like really cool, and you've got like this retro / nostalgia thing. The old Patriots uniform that has like the Patriot on the helmet. That's pretty cool. I kind of like it. I like the old Denver Broncos uniform, right? Some of that stuff is kind of fun. Something that's not cool but kind of fun and hokey is the Vikings fight song. That one's kind of cool. But it's not like cool and retro. It's cool and hokey, right? And dorky. But like the Jets one just sucks. It just sucks. So good question. James has a good candidate for the worst one. I think the Jets is competing with them for that one. But the best, and obviously I'm biased not because of my feelings for or against the Vikings, but rather because I watched it a lot. But I do think that the Skull chant is killer. I love it.
I think that Fly Eagles Fly is god awful.
It's bad.
So years ago, I was DJing weddings, and I was DJing a wedding on the campus of St. Thomas in St. Paul. And at the very end of it, some drunk idiot grabs the mic as I'm finishing up as I'm like doing my announcement saying, hey, thank you guys for coming out. Congratulations to the bride and groom. Safe trip home, all of that. He grabs the mic and proceeds to do Fly Eagles Fly until like I turned off the mic and he was still screaming it into it. Like to the crowd. Jesus. It was amazing. It's the only time that anyone ever grabbed my mic during the end of the evening. So, and he did it to do Fly Eagles Fly, which probably explains why I think it's so stupid. But there's also, I thought the Ravens one was a little weird. Like it's spelling out Ravens, but like when I went there for the game last year, there was a larger guy who would just like rip his shirt off to get like the crowd crowd wound up, and then he would just start spelling like Ravens with his like whole body and whatever. And like that's fine, but it still seemed a little forced or old or whatever. But the crowd seemed to enjoy it, so there is that. And whatever they do in Green Bay, just in general, is probably poor.
Yeah, whatever they do there. Yeah, pretty bad.
Chris asks, has this been the year of the most backup quarterback usage across the league?
Good question. I don't know precisely how to answer that with a ton of accuracy, but I can get really close. So I looked at the number of quarterbacks who have thrown at least 10 passes for a team since the year 2000. At first, it was kind of difficult because I was not doing a very good job organizing the parameters, but that's on me. And I got the full seasons to see kind of what the benchmark should be as we look, and obviously a week 17 or later on a week 18 game with a backup quarterback is a little bit different, because then you end up with like maybe 2 or 3 quarterbacks that year when really the starter played the entire game. So this is an approximation, and of course if a Teddy Bridgewater situation where a quarterback gets injured in the preseason, that wouldn't get logged in this data. But this is a pretty close approximation. And so the most we've ever seen is 73 quarterbacks with at least 10 passing attempts in a game for a team in a particular year. And it has to be in a game, right? So if like a wide receiver or a running back throws 10 passes over the course of a season, it wouldn't count here. So it's at least 10 passes in at least one game over the course of a season. So yeah, that's 73. That's really high. In 2005, it was 70. In 2020, not too long ago, it was 69. Nice. Now, obviously, 2022 is the lowest with 54 because there are still 6 weeks left to play. And so that's kind of skewing the data. So I looked at it up until or up through week 12. And 2022 is not at the top, right? 2007 and 2005, which were number 1 and 2 at the end of the year, are also at the top for the total. 2020 is also near the top at 58. Remember, as a COVID year, that kind of makes sense. 2022 is in the upper half at 54. Now, if I did kind of a more detailed look at which quarterbacks are playing significant roles for their teams when they weren't supposed to, maybe the feeling I get is that 2022 should be higher, right? And so I'm sure if I looked at and said, hey, it's not really the same thing when Jordan Love gets 10 passes in cleanup, but it is the same thing when Jordan Love starts a game. Maybe I could look at total starts, right? Or something along those lines, or maybe I could just kind of do it manually and see which team or which player was supposed to start for that team. But right now, it doesn't look like 2022 is on pace to be kind of the most backup quarterback year, but it does feel like it is. And so I understand the spirit of this question, and maybe that feeling is worth kind of doing a deeper dive into the data, because while you wouldn't count somebody like Geno Smith, you probably count somebody like Jacoby Brissett, right, who so far does not show up in the data as an additional quarterback. He only shows up as one, right? But he's basically a backup. How often we're Mike White, for example, he does show up in the data, but it feels like Mike White plays a bigger role than somebody who played a cleanup duty in a game, in week 18 or something like that. So yeah, it certainly feels like that's the case, and maybe it's kind of worth exploring more in depth. But the initial look that I have at the data tells us it's not really the case. By the way, the lowest were 2006 and 2012 through 12 weeks, which they were at 47 and 45. The lowest through a full season, again, 2012 and 2019, with 57 and 54.
Next question is going to be from Luke Braun, who asks, for the moral standings corner, the Vikings are in the running for a top pick. But what's their exact moral record? Who do they pick morally? Also, Green Bay won the moral game of the year by getting a decent quarter out of Jordan Love in Philly. Can they sneak into the moral playoffs?
Yeah, I mean, because moral victories are not tallied up as one game counts as one win or one loss, it is possible that on the strength of that game alone, the Packers could sneak into the moral playoffs. But I think that for the most part, the Packers have taken so many moral losses this year that you can't really do that, right? First of all, they took an off-field one with Aaron Rodgers this week, but on the field, I mean, the loss to the Vikings, huge moral loss. I mean, they gave the Vikings a Super Bowl right there. I think the loss to I think they did beat the Chicago Bears, but that felt like a moral loss because the Bears were in it for the entire first half. Maybe not on the final analysis, but the loss to the Jets was a huge moral loss. I think the win against the Patriots you might count as a moral loss. It really depends on what your expectations of the Packers in week 4. But yeah, I don't know. I think the L's have piled up. I mean, the loss to the Lions, right? The L's have piled up that the having that moral victory with the Eagles and having Jordan Love play well, probably not enough to push you in. Now we can go through it, game by game to see whether or not the Vikings have a moral victory or a moral loss. We can even tally it up as we're doing it. So, which is actually pretty easy. Green Bay Packers, that's obviously a moral win. Philadelphia Eagles, that's obviously a moral loss. Detroit Lions, that is a win, but it was a moral loss. The Vikings should not have allowed the Lions to get back into the game. They looked pretty bad. The Lions are not a very well-regarded team. They lost versus the spread. Those are all important indications. New Orleans Saints, that's a win. It was in London. I don't love how the game played out, and I thought it provided evidence that the Vikings were not going to sustainably continue winning throughout the season, but I don't think that was a moral loss. Tough for me to say it was a moral win, but actually, let's blank that one out. Let's say that is neither a moral win nor a moral loss. Chicago Bears, that was a 29-22 win, but I think the Bears came back late, so it wasn't really like a one-possession game in the same way. I'm going to blank that one out. That one's a moral loss. Miami Dolphins, that was a win. I don't think it was a moral loss in any respect. I don't think it was a moral win either. They were supposed to win that game, so I'm going to blank that out. So right now, they're 1-2 in moral wins and moral losses. Arizona Cardinals 34-26. I'm trying to remember kind of the storylines of that game. We might be able to get a moral win or loss. Let's take a look at the score record. So obviously the Vikings score on the opening drive. Cardinals answer with a field goal. Vikings score again with a Johnny Munt catch in the end zone, 14-3, 14-10, 17-14 with the Zach Ertz pass. So they get...
It was closer than it should have been.
It was closer than it should have been, but I don't think it followed the script in the same way. I'm not going to count that as a moral loss. I think at the time we still thought the Cardinals had something.
Yes, we were prepared for them to be good.
Yeah, so because I've blanked out so many games, I'm just gonna count that as a moral win. Maybe make that an accumulation of some of the blanked out games being slightly positive over a period of time. Washington Commanders, I see that as a moral loss. I don't know about you. It took a last minute pick. Taylor Heineke looked really good when we thought he couldn't do that.
Yep.
The Washington Commanders were too close as a 3-point game. Buffalo Bills, even though it went to overtime, even though the Vikings allowed the Bills back in, it was the Bills. That's definitely a moral victory. Dallas Cowboys is definitely a moral loss. The Patriots, I think we should blank that one out. Does that seem like a moral win or a moral loss to you?
It doesn't really fit either, considering.
Yeah. So let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4. So the Vikings are 3-4 morally. So that's tough. It's going to be tough to sneak into the playoffs that way. The Jets, for example, have way more moral victories right now. If we're doing a moral playoffs, you probably separate into NFC, AFC. But just thinking about their next opponent, the Detroit Lions have so many moral victories, so many, just by virtue of being the top scoring offense in the league at one point. You don't expect them to be there, and everybody loves Dan Campbell, and so every victory is a victory, and a lot of the losses are victories as well. So it'll be tough to beat out the teams that have low expectations. I'm just taking a look at the Vikings schedule going forward. Indianapolis Colts, full of moral losses. That one's pretty easy. Obviously, with Jeff Saturday in, there's a new set of expectations. Basically, every game has been a moral win, except the time management actually snatched the last one away from the Colts. I'll say they're 2-1 under Jeff Saturday. New York Giants is mostly moral victories. They did drop off a little bit. Green Bay Packers, we just discussed. Chicago Bears, that one's really tough to figure out if they've got a bunch of moral victories or moral losses. I think the Seahawks have a lot of moral victories this year because they didn't expect Geno Smith to do this well. The 49ers have a couple of moral victories this year because Jimmy wasn't supposed to be playing. Just thinking about the NFC opponents, and I think that it would be tough on a 3-4 moral victory record for you to sneak into the playoffs. Certainly, I don't think the Packers could do it with just the big one that they just got.
You know, it's a fun stat, and I don't believe I'm off on this, so correct me if I'm wrong. But Aaron Rodgers has not lost to the same quarterback in a year twice, except for Brett Favre in 2009. There's an opportunity for Aaron Rodgers to lose to Kirk Cousins twice this year or Jared Goff twice this year.
Yeah. Oh man.
I mean, I know he wants to play this year because he owns the Bears and everything, but like there's a real fun like tarnishment of a legacy going on here if Jared Goff gets you twice.
Yeah. That's brutal legacy ender there.
Yeah. Nolan Kaler asks, for North Code, what does a Canadian grill look like? And, much like the Rouge, three down efficiency, etc., what is the factor that makes it obviously superior to its American counterparts? Now, in this case, the grill he's talking about is the type you put on your teeth. Apparently, the grill in question for Kirk Cousins that his dentist has been swamped with offers for is coming from Canada. So that's a thing.
It was just one of them. It came from Canada, right?
Yeah.
Okay, first of all, I spent a lot of time in Canada. Your country's not that great. Sorry. Love the healthcare. Would love to steal it. That's about it. The country mostly blows. I like Vancouver. I like Toronto. The rest of it, take it or leave it. So I don't think that the grills in Canada are going to be all that great. I think that you probably are going to be replacing the diamonds with some form of crystallized maple, right? I think that the gold is probably just burnished timber. It's probably just not good to have in your mouth for a long period of time. There are backwards people up there. And so, and folks, they're not sending their best. I wish I could say otherwise, but they send their lumberjacks and their singers, and it really makes you question. So
there's a lot of anti-Canada. I just want to point out that they're like our second or third. I think it's actually our third biggest demographic behind England. So behind the United Kingdom. Arif's stance on this is not the official stance of Norse Code.
Is a lot of our traffic from Saskatchewan specifically?
A good chunk of it is, yes.
Yeah. Stop listening to the show. Hate Saskatchewan. Get out of here.
That is not how any of this works. Even when that click thing or whatever boosted our listens for one of those episodes. So the other day, I'm checking the stats on one of the episodes because the Google or say the Spotify Wrapped thing comes out, and Spotify Wrapped comes out for individuals. It also comes out for people who have podcasts on it. And so I was looking at the podcast stats for it, and I went, "What the heck is going on with this other episode that's like 2 weeks old? Why do we have so many listens on it?" And it's way more than we ever get. Like, the most we've ever gotten times 5. There's no reason at all why there should be more people listening to this episode than live in my hometown.
Right. And again, it was 2 weeks old when the spike happened, right?
Yeah, it was absolutely like somebody paid for a listen farm or a click farm or whatever for it. It was not us, and it was definitely not through the Patreon.
I need to stress is bizarre because we don't use the view counts like for anything. I don't use it to negotiate, rates. We don't have advertisers that we'd use the view. Like it just does not help us at all.
No,
it just slightly stresses the Libsyn servers a tiny smidgen of a bit. Like, it is so bizarre that this happened, and it serves no one.
And I was telling Arif, this is like, well, if you need to use this to negotiate a price or whatever, like, you're super popular in Mexico, according to this. Like,
yeah, but only on Samsung phones.
Yeah, only on Samsung phones.
Yeah.
But
I alienating the Saskatchewan audience means nothing. I will live on the Samsung Mexico demographic.
Well, I suppose that's always been the dream, hasn't it?
Yeah, I can't see that going. I'll go to a Goku Taqueria. It'll be great.
Let's go to Ingram's Left Foot, who asks, apparently Arif doesn't like my Twitter handle. Has he ever tried changing his handle from his name in this turkey business? Can he, in fact, come up with a better one?
So when I went to change my Twitter handle, so like I clicked on edit profile, right, and it shows up, and I can enter in stuff into the text bar. That's my name, so I just changed it to Reef Hassan, secularly festive or something like that. I think I changed it from that, but it was something festive and Christmassy, and I put a Santa emoji at the end, which I don't think I've done before. I think they've been like snowman and snowflake emojis. It was going to be my first Santa emoji. I was really excited. And then I click apply, and it just said denied. And I was like, oh, this is still happening. Okay, cool. The original tweet from Elon Musk just said I would lose like my check mark for a couple of days, which fine, but I just can't like do it. I just can't, like, it won't let me do it. So no, I can't. I just hate Turkey now, and I hope nothing happens with like the country of Turkey that's going to make that feel weird. When I gotta, maybe I should just tweet at Elon Musk, man. I don't know, but yeah, it's tough.
As long as you avoid anything involving like Kirkish things.
Jesus. Okay. Yeah, or no natural disasters in Turkey. I guess.
Yep.
Yeah. But yeah, as for Ed Ingram's left, you can change your Twitter handle. I'm not going to tell you what it should be. I can just tell you I don't like it.
He just wants you to go back to Bishop Sycamore alumnus.
That was pretty good, but that joke has run its course. I need a new one would be fine, but
yeah. Beef Brewski asks, in a prior Q&A, I asked Arif to comment on Kirk's potential use of demonic forces to aid in the team's success. I misattributed the view that faithful Christians could use demonic forces to Byzantine monk Sellos. This was inaccurate. Despite Sellos' affinity for the for theurgy, this view is more accurately ascribed to the author of the Testament of Solomon, which Ed Simon identifies as an influence for Sellos' work. With that in mind, which demonic entity has Kirk harnessed to aid the Vikings?
Okay, well, I'm glad I didn't just make stuff up about what Sellos believed and just said, hey, I couldn't find any summary of this guy's work online. I could just find the original text, and the original text is unreadable to me in the 10 minutes I have before a podcast. But I didn't. In response to that futility, I did not look up anything in regards to this particular question when I saw it in the mailbag, and I will continue to not look it up. What demonic force is assisting Kirk Cousins? Now, again, under the auspices of this particular theological line of thought, a demon assisting Kirk Cousins or a devil assisting Kirk Cousins does not take away from Kirk Cousins' central faith, I guess. Like, it's Christians can use demonic forces for good is the thing. So a demon assisting Kirk Cousins would not, under this particular theological interpretation, be in any way heretical. I'm sure it will go well for me to say that before I say it's Baphomet. It's the goat god. It's the one with the pentagram symbol that's often associated with Satanism. It's Baphomet.
Yeah, why not?
Yeah.
At this point,
okay, so the thing about Baphomet is balance, right? We talked about this, like 6 weeks ago? How long have we been talking about demons and magic, James?
Too long.
How long?
Too long.
We talked about this before. His thing is balance. I feel like this is just kind of all of the close game luck that the Vikings don't have is now swinging in their favor. It is a global balancing of the scales. That is how Baphomet is assisting Kirk Cousins. I'm sure I pronounced that wrong like 8 times. Don't correct me.
Next week is the final episode. We will entertain anything involving supernatural witches, Wiccans, or whatever. This is it. So if you have questions on it, get them in for Monday's show. I'm done. You were done like a week and a half ago, 2 weeks ago. I'm done now. So
great.
This is it. Get them in now. Adam Bryant asks, how did Arif feel about Drop Play Dave's roast on the Russell Wilson turkey?
Okay, so I retweeted the Russell Wilson turkey from Drop Play Dave, and it did not occur to me that he was probably subtweeting me when I did that.
He may have been trying to get your attention.
Yeah, so he so he does game predictions every Sunday, and the cost of being wrong is that he draws a cartoon in the particular theme that he chooses that week. So this theme was Thanksgiving and Thanksgiving food. So for example, he picked the Raiders to lose. The Raiders won, so he had to draw Derek Carr with one R. So Derek the Carr cooking a pumpkin pie on his hood, right? Or he picked the Ravens to win. The Jaguars won, so so he drew sexy Trevor Lawrence smothered in gravy, right? The gravy seemed kind of incidental to the whole drawing, if I'm going to be honest. That one felt a little less relevant to the Thanksgiving food theme, but it was there, right? But yeah, this one, he said, if the Panthers win, I will draw Russ cooked flawlessly with moist, delicious, tender meat and a crispy, salty, buttery skin. Now, realizing that this is a subtweet of the ability to cook turkey well, and also the fact that he just used a masking technique to just, instead of drawing the turkey, he just has a picture of a turkey beneath it that he is masked onto it's unsettling. But it looks like a good turkey for what it is, right? And it seems like it is well cooked. If only he had spent that time cooking a better meat.
I think that it looks like it's lost half the locker room. But that's just me. Brian Jellison,
at least it's not Zach Wilson. At least it's still got more of the locker room than Zach Wilson does.
I suppose. Brian Jellerson asks, Arif, I'm trying to reach you from beyond the veil to warn you, James is the witch. Why else would you be compelled to answer witchcraft questions against your better judgment? Why else would people want his cursed items? You've been hexed and you need to wake up. Get out. If you can read this, I know you don't have much time. Do not listen to him. None of this is real. You need to. And then it just trails off. I wonder what that's about. Let's go to Jesse, who asks...
Well, you don't want to spend time on that one?
I don't know why. I don't even know what was just said. Jesse from Brooklyn asks... After James's gaffe last episode, oh god, of leaving in 3 minutes of Arif silently Googling things, which
what?
So
I don't listen to our own episodes, so that's news to me.
I noticed it when I played back in the car the next morning. There was a point at which you started Googling Adam Schefter stuff to make sure you were right, it wasn't bad. It was just you Googling things to make sure that you had all the Schefter stuff that you needed. And it was
that lined up, yeah.
Yeah,
okay.
So that's what he's talking about. Yes, I left it in. I forgot to make an edit point. My bad. So after James's gaffe last episode of leaving in about 3 minutes of Arif silently Googling things, which Viking would be best to replace him as our producer and co-host? My money is on Harrison Phillips. That seems like it would be a lot of fun.
I want feedback from people about how enjoyable those 3 minutes were. So please let me know if you thought the 3 minutes of me silently Googling things in the middle of a podcast is content that you enjoy.
I mean, I can make bonus material of Arif just Googling things. If that's
I can bring in the clicky keyboard I have.
Oh god,
to make it seem even more immersive.
You know, you should spend more time.
ASMR, right? Is that what that would be?
You should spend more time in the Discord, because there was a conversation in the gaming subreddit today about mechanical keyboards.
Oh my god! Oh, so okay. Side note, and I'm only doing this because the mailbag was short enough to have side notes like this. I have a friend who does the whole. I don't know if they went this deep on the mechanical keyboards thing in the Discord channel. Again, I haven't checked it in 2 weeks. That's my bad. I should go back. But especially because that place is definitely better than Twitter or any of the group chats I'm in. It would just be healthier for me to go back and go through the horrifying images that have been posted in Online Brain. That's just better for me mentally, which tells you about how good my Twitter is. But anyway, I have a friend who makes custom mechanical keyboards, and because of some of the stuff I've done for them and his friends over the years, he decided to make me one. Now, this is a pretty huge gift. It is, I paid for some of it, but it is mechanical keyboards, because of the labor involved, can run up to custom mechanical keyboards can run up to like $800, $900, and the ones that are made for like streamers and internet celebrities can be in the thousands, right? Because of the labor that's involved, it takes a lot of hours to individually prepare each switch. You buy individual keycaps, you buy individual boards, you have individual sound treatment for those boards, you buy your own PCB for that keyboard, although that usually comes with the keyboard, and you buy all of the individual switches that toggle things, and there are thousands upon thousands of options for keycaps, hundreds and hundreds of options for switches, and millions of different ways you can sound treat the board. It's a very detailed hobby that can get very expensive when you buy all the parts individually and they're not manufactured by machine. And they made this keyboard for me, and it is the best keyboard I have ever owned in my life. Now, my understanding is that this keyboard would typically be valued around $400, which is way more than I would spend on a keyboard. But also, I love it, and I might, if ever pressed, spend $400 on it. It's so good. I type thousands of words a day, so I guess it makes sense. But it is so good. I can't get over it. That's the one I would bring down for the research ASMR. I can get up to 130 words per minute on that keyboard. It's my fastest keyboard as well. The current silent one that I use for podcasting, which is not actually silent, it's just muted. I have trouble breaking like 105, and my laptop I can break 120, but this one I can break like 130, 135. It's so great for typing on. Anyway, the mechanical keyboard hobby is insane. It is expensive. It is time consuming. It is labor intensive. And just even watching the YouTube breakdowns of the different types of things you can do. And most of the YouTube stuff is like beginner stuff, right? They want to introduce as many people to the hobby as possible. It is absolutely what they have, like strong opinions on like the Holy Panda switches, which are this like discontinued switch from like again, a switch is just the thing that makes the keyboard turn a key press into an electronic signal. It is the thing that goes click when you press a keyboard down, and they care so much about it that there's like an urban legend about the Holy Panda switch because the factory that makes them was discontinued, and there's like a rumor that like this other manufacturer had all the plans and the equipment, and so they're making it. It's so wild how in-depth this thing is. Absolutely crazy. Anyway, I don't know if that's what the Discord was talking about, but hopefully, because it's way cooler to talk about that than like, I got this Corsair gaming keyboard. It feels cooler than the membrane keyboard that came with the computer.
Yeah. Well, let's end with Don from Ohio.
Great.
Don says, it's pretty clear the sins of the father have caught up with Green Bay. For them to win 2 Super Bowls in the past 25 years, it took them to hire one QB who sent inappropriate pictures to women who weren't his wife / milk millions of dollars from the poor of his home state. Mm-hmm. And the other QB is a conspiracy theorist whack job who puts thousands of lives in jeopardy by lying about his COVID status. Oh, and his family disowned him. With all that said, if it meant the Vikings winning a Super Bowl, would you want the scum of the earth at quarterback? Also, if Jordan Love is the next Hall of Fame quarterback for them, what skeletons does he have in his closet?
Goodness. That last one's tough because he's like a player and technically I'm a reporter. I'm so much of a reporter that I have a blue check so strong I can't change my name. Sorry, this is bothering me. So I need to be careful about what I say about Jordan Love. I will just say, well, he went to Utah State, right? Strong Mormon population in Utah and Utah State and BYU. Obviously more BYU than anywhere else. Potentially, Mormons would argue that there's federal discrimination against Mormons. That's maybe true, actually. But also there have just been a lot of scandals with that particular church. Maybe he gets involved in one of those scandals. That sounds way less destructive than what Brett Favre did. So hopefully that's the one. And also potentially less destructive than what Aaron Rodgers... If Aaron Rodgers wakes more people up or whatever, he like loose change pills them. I don't know what you call that, actually. Let's just say it's that. That's pretty bad, and it sets people on like a political path that is genuinely damaging. Sort of like in a Kanye direction, if I want to be clear. So, that could even be worse than what Brett Favre did. Probably not, but really morally reprehensible. A church scandal here or there seems like I guess depending on the scandal, right? There's some ones that are worse than others. But, you know, could not be as bad as Brett Favre bilking millions of dollars in welfare away. So hopefully that's the one. That if it meant the Vikes winning a Super Bowl, would I want the scum of the earth at quarterback? No, I wouldn't. I would not want Deshaun Watson at quarterback because all I could talk about is the Deshaun Watson stuff. Right? I can write articles about a football player without being very involved in the off-field stuff and how it impacts them. I did that with Ed Ingram, right? My piece over at The Athletic on Ed Ingram only references the off-field stuff with Ed Ingram near the end and only as it matters as regards to valuation, right? I've made my thoughts on Ed Ingram very clear, but I can separate those things out, but I cannot stop. So I can write some articles here or there on a consistent weekly basis that don't address, what Deshaun Watson has been accused of, but no way can I stop talking about it. Every couple of weeks I'll bring it up, and then my Twitter mentions will be awful. Deshaun Watson's not even the quarterback of the team I cover, and my Twitter mentions have been absolutely awful this week. And also the Aaron Rodgers stuff did not super help. I just have a bunch of 9/11 truthers in my mentions, which, again, it's better than like Deshaun Watson defenders, I guess.
But like more than usual.
Yeah, more than usual. More than usual. It's okay. Here's the thing about like truthers in my mentions. I just don't respond to them, right? Like sometimes if I put out a political opinion and somebody disagrees and I think they're being dumb, I'll quote tweet them and that starts up a whole cycle and it's a bunch of engagement, whatever, right? But like the 9/11 truthers, I just don't want to respond to them or quote tweet them or whatever because I think it hurts more than it helps, first of all. But second, like I'm not going to change their mind, right? Like the risk is generally just not worth it that I help this guy get traction versus not, which I guess, tweeting out the Deshaun Watson video, I don't know. But a ton of people, because this tweet went kind of viral, right? It was like a couple hundred retweets, a couple thousand likes. So a bunch of people saw about 700,000 views on the video, right? And so a bunch of people are seeing in my mentions these 9/11 truthers. And so they're responding to them. And it's not like they're arguing with them. And it's like not working because obviously it's not working. The truther has spent years in the muck, right? They've spent like 10 years thinking about this and finding the best ways that they can convey what they think to be the. And you're just a guy. You just a guy that believes the correct thing, maybe. I don't want to step on Dusty's toes here. Believes the correct thing, but has not spent a ton of time going through all of the intricacies of every single argument the 9/11 truthers make, even if they're wrong. It's like losing to a moon landing conspiracy person. You're in the right, but you don't have all of the tools available to you to get that out there in a way that's compelling in 280 characters or less. And so these people are arguing with these 9/11 truthers who've been arguing their entire life, right? They don't argue with the fool, they'll drag you down to their level sort of stuff. And they've been spending 2 days in my mentions, and they bother me more than the 9/11 truthers. The 9/11 truthers are worse, but these people in my mentions bother because what do you think you're going to get out of this, man? And at one point, one person was like, all right, I cannot believe you can't answer this question. I can't believe it. Oh my God. I keep asking you this question. This is the person that is trying to debunk a truther, right? I keep on trying to get you to answer this question so we can move forward with the argument, and you will not answer it. If you don't answer it, I'm done. And I couldn't help myself. I tweeted at the dude, hey man, on your side, but you spent 2 days my mentions are just you for 2 days arguing with this guy. How is that the last straw? Why did you think it was going to work? What's your goal here? And he was like, yeah, you're right. I should stop. And I was like, yeah, man, it was never going to work.
Arif is telling you to stop arguing on the internet.
2 days.
Just that's the that's when you know that things have gone too far. The person who every year for his New Year's resolution
gets in more fights on Twitter.
Says he's going to get on more fights on Twitter. Yeah, you should find something else to do. It's hard for the Packers thing though, because the bar is so high. And I'm not even referring to Aaron Rodgers or Brett Favre here. They've literally had a murderer on their payroll before.
That's right. Oh my God, I totally forgot about it. We were going through the Packers first round bus and one of them was a serial killer.
Yeah, we like on a previous earlier this year, we did a bonus episode where a discussion with Arif and I happened. We were going over all the busts for first round picks for the Packers, and one of them was a serial killer. So like
this is like way back, by the way.
Yeah, this is a while.
Yeah,
but like he still did dumb stuff in Green Bay. So like it's not like he was some Boy Scout there.
You know how in the show Dexter, which is that dated because they just did like a revival thing? I don't know.
Not dated yet.
Okay, in the show Dexter, like the whole premise of the show, and this isn't like a spoiler, it's like mid-season 1, right? That they go. The whole premise of the show is that Dexter, the titular character, is like psychologically, I don't know, addicted is the wrong word, but he has a drive and urge to like be a serial killer, right? And so his father, a cop, is like, well, we'll just use this power for good. And so the premise of the show is that he engages in a ton of extrajudicial killings of people that are definitely guilty. The show makes it very clear they are super guilty. Dexter is the closest thing to a good guy that you'll find in the serial killer genre. The show is very, very insistent upon this. We're definitely guilty, but just slip through the cracks of the justice system. And that's the only way that he is just addicted to serial killing. And like, it's kind of crazy, but this dude was so addicted to being this guy that when he got drafted, because it was like Oregon or somewhere in the Pacific Northwest, he gets drafted by the Packers and he just keeps it up in Green Bay. Like, just stop, man. Just stop.
Randall Woodfield was his name. And yes, he was in Oregon.
So yeah, there you go.
Yeah. It's of all dumb things, suspected of killing up to 44 people. So as a result, it's hard to gauge where the line is. But no, I couldn't. I would probably stop watching if the quarterback was that reprehensible. I'd find another team. My son's big into the Ravens. I'd just go there.
Yeah, there you go.
That the likelihood seems slightly lower. I don't know. I would find it difficult, more so. Well, that's going to be it for this episode of Norse Code. Hope you guys have enjoyed it. Reef, what do you have to plug?
Yes, you can find my stuff over at Pro Football Network. I've got an upcoming piece on Trevor Lawrence that I finished that's going to go up either Sunday or like the next time it feels relevant to talk about Trevor Lawrence, but probably Sunday. But my recent piece on Deshaun Watson is up. I teased that on the last episode. Otherwise, that's about it. I'm going to be doing a bunch of game recaps on Sunday, and all the pieces that I did last week that I already plugged in the show are already there. But the Deshaun Watson stuff was pretty difficult to write, so and people really liked it. So I'm really glad that it got a positive reception, and I'd like it if other people checked it out.
Well, that's going to be it for this episode of Norse Code. We will be back on Monday night to discuss the Jets game. So, for Arif, my name is James. Thank you guys so much. And please remember that this is not sustainable. And we will be back next week. Norse Code is the largest and only division of Norse Code LLC. You can find Norse Code on the Daily Norseman, SB Nation's Vikings blog at dailynorseman.com. You can also find it on iTunes, Apple Podcast, Spotify, Stitcher, Google Play, and wherever fine podcasts are aggregated. Our Vikings blogger extraordinaire and generally useful human is Arif Hassan of Pro Football Network, and he can be found at Arif Hassan NFL. I am your producer and host, and my name is James Pagashnik. You can find me at the show's official Twitter feed at NorseCodeDN or my personal account at Big Mono. If you'd like to donate a few bucks to the show, you can do so in a few different ways. You can go to patreon.com/NorseCode and donate there. For $3.50 a month, you get bonus material and more. You can also go to paypal.me/NorseCode for a one-time donation, or you can go to norsecode.threadless.com and pick up some Norse Code merchandise. Any questions or comments that cannot fit in a tweet can be sent to norsecodepodcast@gmail.com. On behalf of the Norse Code staff, thank you so much for listening.
Our formula is this.
Hey, all things are possible through the power of Ben DiNucci.